Moving on to some supercars. Sydney Motorsport Park over the weekend.
Yeah,
What were your main takeaways, mate? You were live on the ground.
I thought first and foremost it was a great weekend. I think that the idea of of the super night or the night race in general um, is a great spectacle for, if you want to, take people to watch car racing. It has a very much of a big bash vibe, which is sort of what they were aiming for when they came up with the idea. I think like after going, I think I've gone to all of the super nights now, but seeing the fact that now there is the permanent lighting and remembering what the lighting was like when they had the sort of higher lighting in place, it is so easy to navigate in the dark because there's so much lighting. Watching cars race under lights is also just a great spectacle. I thought the spectacle was awesome. The cars sound awesome. The way that they handle on the road and look, when your trackside is really all you really need if you are a petrol head. And then I think people will have comments to say about the parity issue as well. It wasn't a great weekend for that over the races, but I think a bit of deep diving into the results will also make a few things clear. But
Didn't Chaz get a P2 at some point?
yeah, Chaz got a P2, Anton got a P3, so there's a Mustang on the podium in on both races, which was, I think, fantastic. But there was still not a great spread in the top 10, which is what a lot of people look at. But going forward, I think like the whole idea of a super night is something that supercars really need to hone in on at races, at venues that can actually offer the spectacle. There was a few other points I thought were really important was races that involve multiple pit stops and refueling offer such a better spectacle than some of the races where there's no pit stops, minimal pit stops. And the fact that there was a race on Saturday night that was a bit longer than the Sunday sprint race, so it was a bit more tactical, and then even the Sunday sprint race was a bit shorter, but the surface at Sydney Motorsport Park is so harsh that the drop off on tires sort of makes when you pit a very sort of strategic decision. That even the short race on Sunday was quite interesting as well. But I think there was a few, like those points, the racing under lights, the slightly longer races are things that if you look through the comments of social media, it's something that the fans are asking for, and it's something that never really disappoints.
Do we think that we don't do more night races because we haven't got the facilities? Like Sydney Motorsport Park is quite a good facility, really, when you look at it. Then you look at some of the other tracks that they race at. I can't really see. They don't go to Phillip Island anymore, do they?
They do.
They do.
I don't know. I don't know if they've got the. Actually, I don't know if they're going this year. I think this year is a much watered down calendar, but they will definitely be going there in the future. I don't know if that track has the lighting facilities. To be honest, there aren't many tracks who have the night lighting facilities, but we've seen them be able to get in higher light, like the higher lights. And if it's a matter of just getting higher lights out there to make a few more of these events, I think that's something that supercars should really look at. The thing as well that is very different about Sydney Motorsport Park is that it's not too far from the CBD, and it's pretty much in suburbia. Whereas like the track that I would have thought would be great for a super night in terms of the track itself, which would be the next track coming up, the Bend, is a decent trek from the CBD. So you wouldn't really want to be going back home after a night event from there. So there are interesting things at play, that's for sure, but that shouldn't stop the questions being asked of how can it be done, or how can we make this spectacle better.
Yeah, I think like I went there with you guys a couple of years ago, and I really enjoyed the SuperNight. But your point about the longer races, I think we say this every time. I think it was the last event in Townsville where they had the two 250K races or whatever it was.
I think
They
so.
were amazing. They were amazing races as well. Like it's always with supercars, I find the sprint races aren't that great. They're really short ones. But when you start throwing in different strategies, different tires, refueling, that's when it starts to get really, because there's always people on alternate strategies. There's always different refueling levels. It just adds to the spectacle so much more.
Well, the sprint race on Sunday, and like I said before, was an interesting race because the surface at Sydney Motorsport Park is very abrasive. So the wear on tires is massive. So you do get the ability to have shorter races that have sort of long race consequences on the tires, I suppose. So that race was really engaging, but you don't get that at all the tracks. Like when you go to Tasmania, you don't really get that. And it's not, so some of the racing isn't really compelling. Like it becomes where you qualify, maybe you go up 5, maybe you go down 5 at the best or at the worst, but where you qualify is sort of where you're going to finish somewhat. So yeah, like the race on Saturday was a 200K race. It wasn't as long as the one that was there a couple of years ago, which was 300Ks, which was probably my favorite, but I didn't feel like it was like this. I thought I was going to be underwhelmed with the length this past Saturday, and I wasn't at all. I thought it was actually really good length, especially for a night race. It was very engaging. 2 pit stops, got a safety car, so everything really fell well. And looking at it as a neutral fan, which I'm not, but trying to be a neutral fan, I thought it was a perfect length. And I think even the fact that there was only running on Saturday and Sunday was also really good because it was all very condensed, which was awesome. But I think what the next point we're going to have to talk about is parity and the problem with how the parity is sort of shaking up. And I think also it's looking at it a bit deeper rather than saying, the Mustangs are just not as good as the Camaros, which I would still say they're probably not. But at the same time, I've written on my notes, the Ford teams need, and I emphasize this, they need to help themselves as well. Because, like, I'll go through a few things, but...
Do you mean like working together to try and find solutions?
Yes and no. You can't have... like when you're running a deficit of cars in general, so there's 11 Fords and there's 14 Camaros. So already you're at a numbers disadvantage. The Camaros can afford to have a few cars make some mistakes, and you're still going to have a somewhat even split where the Fords don't have that luxury at all. And in the second race on the Sunday, there was, out of the 11 Fords, there was about 5 of them that all had like really costly errors, like long pit stops, missing the marks, coming in with bent steering, so they couldn't get the tires off in time, stalling, dropping the car with one tire. Like there was like 5 cars that made like proper long pit stop stuff ups, all Fords. And then I looked at the spread, and the cars that didn't do that all moved up positions during the race. All the Fords who didn't make a mistake in their pit stop went up positions. The only ones who went down positions were the ones who stuffed up their pit stops. So, not saying that's the problem, but if we want to make, I suppose, the best judgments we possibly can, the 4 teams have to eradicate those mistakes from the data, so we can sort of see, all right, this was because I said to Tristan as well last week, we know what Ford teams have done well at Sydney Motorsport Park from history. Tickford, and they were thereabouts in qualifying and racing all weekend. We know that Walkinshaw are notoriously bad at qualifying at Sydney Motorsport Park, and like clockwork, they showed up bad in qualifying. I thought it was interesting that Dick Johnson Racing didn't look great on Saturday in qualifying. But on Sunday, they seemed to put something together and they were able to get a podium as well. So there was no real surprises for me among the Ford teams about what happened on both those races. And then in race pace, Chaz had great race pace Saturday and Sunday, which was surprising because Saturday was cold temperatures with not much deg. Sunday was hot temperatures with a lot more deg. And he still was really fast on both days. Cam also really fast on both days. Probably got screwed over by his penalty on Saturday. And then on Sunday, he got he stalled it in the pit lane and lost about 3 seconds, which then ended up putting him behind a group rather than in front of a group after his pit stop, which would have hindered him as well. So them guys were awesome. Anton got a podium on Sunday, and if you looked at his pace at the end of the race, he was comfortably able to overtake Feeney and get on the podium. So it wasn't, I don't think that it was the cars that you sort of would have expected to be up the front and be repping the Ford brand looked just as good as the Camaros this week, I suppose.
Can I ask, this whole palaver about parity, do we think this has something to do with it? And it's just something that I've thought of. We constantly see Cam, Chaz, and even Anton won a race, I think, last time out.
He won one. He won one last time out. That's right.
Yeah. Is it the drop off in driver quality in the Ford ranks compared to the quality in the Chevy ranks that's causing this parity issue? Like what seems to be a parity issue, because obviously Cam, Chaz, and sometimes Anton are able to get results, but the others aren't.
I'm going to say something that is probably going to be very what's the word? Is not going to be taken well. But I believe that the Ford ranks are massively understaffed in terms of the heavy hitters of our sport. When you look at Triple Eight racing, whether you love them, which is not many people, or whether you hate them, which is a lot of people because of how good they are usually de facto 1 and 2 in the championship. So, and that's been through 3 generations of car of the future and before that. So let's say we hypothetically remove them from the situation, because they have been the best of the best for over a decade. And then you look at Erebus, who have invested in 2 really good, really fast drivers, and have probably been the best identifiers of talent in terms of their drivers over the last sort of 2 pairings they've had. They had David Reynolds in his prime, paired with Anton, who then moved to Dick Johnson Racing. And then they were quickly filled it with Will Brown and Brody Kostecki, who even before this year were still consistently in the top 6s or top 10. So them 2 guys have not appeared out of nowhere. They have been there and they've been doing the hard work. Right. So they're the top 4 of the championship at the moment. After that is Chaz, who, while he's been at Walkinshaw, has been around and about there that whole time. And there's Cam and in the top 10 as well, which is no anomaly. I think he's like 7th. Actually, I've got it here. I've pulled up the championship as we speak, because I knew we were going to talk about this. So Chaz is 5th after the 2 teams we spoke about. Heim Gardner is 6th. Cam Waters is 7th. And then Jack LeBrock, Fullwood, and Winterbottom are 8th, 9th, and 10th. This is where I suppose the questions would become, because Jack LeBrock is probably having the best year he's ever had. Fullwood, having said that, showed a lot of promise last year, but has never sat in the top 10 in the championship, probably never sat in the top 15. And then Mark Winterbottom he's probably doing better than he's done in a long time as well. So I think that is where the questions sort of start arising. But for how the top seven are sitting at the moment, like realistically, that has been very close to how it's been, give or take, for the last couple of years. I think
If
the four drivers and the four teams at the same time, and also Anton's sitting very low this year, even though he's won a race. Like, he's still sitting at 13th. Will Davidson sitting in 11th.
Well, they didn't do much for the first however many rounds.
No,
So
and they were non-existent. Courtney and Randall are sitting in 17th and 18th with Matt Payne. So yeah, the back end is really bad for the Fords, and Perkat's in 23rd, which is ridiculous. Like, he's been shit this year. So
I guess that's what I'm saying. Like, the gap between the top guys in Ford ranks versus the
there
guys
isn't as
underneath
many.
them.
There isn't as many. Like,
No.
that's it. Like, that's the thing, that the strength of numbers in the Ford ranks, I don't think is as close. But having said that, drivers like Courtney have been better than a lot of the drivers, a lot of the Camaro drivers in front of me as well. So I'm not saying that's all the problems. But like, even this weekend, it was apparent that the qualifying pace, either if it's pace or the fact that they've changed this Mustang in the last two events and they still don't know the sweet spot for qualifying. It was apparent how bad how much worse the four teams were at qualifying. But then when you watch the race pace, they were able to, mix it up really well. So how that, shakes out in the long run. And I know, like, a lot of people, like, I think Tristan made a good point last week about, like, if we get to Bathurst and the parity is still an issue, it's going to sort of ruin the spectacle. I think one thing that is becoming apparent is, well, even this weekend at a track that is a lot of high deg, the race pace of, I think, the Fords isn't the problem. It is the qualifying pace. But also it's the fact that the teams are making a lot of mistakes in the pits, which is dropping the cars down a lot lower than possible, a lot lower. Drivers are making mistakes as well. That all drivers make mistakes. That's fair enough. But it's a lot of the Ford drivers as well doing most of them. And I think some of the Ford teams need to take a big swing and try and bring in, trying to lure some of the drivers that are really sitting in that Camaro stable and try and even the numbers a little bit as well.
Speaking of moving drivers, I saw a couple of articles this weekend where SVG is hinting that could be going next year, regardless of his contract.
It sounds like he's going next year. I would say he's going next year from what it sounded like this weekend. He doesn't know if he's going to have a full-time driver next year, but he's going to have at least a part-time NASCAR driver, and he said he can't do both at once.
So what does Triple Eight do? Do they poach Cam or Chaz, or do they try and bring up from within? Like, do they have many drivers in their ranks, like a Brock Feeney or something? Like, what do you envisage?
They've taken a punt on Stanaway, and I can't see them not giving him a chance. They've also got the GOAT Win Cup in the ranks, so I reckon if he really needed to, could do the job for a year as well. I don't think they've got any young guys who they can afford to put with Feeney for it at the moment, if they're really chasing the team's championship.
Yeah, that was going to be my thing, because if they bring someone up that's young and fresh, I know Feeney's pretty good for his age, but it's not really something that most top teams would do. Have two young guns.
I think if Stanaway performs well in the enduro drives he has, and they'll be able to tell from his pace, obviously, how close he is to the main gamers. If he performs well, which he's done in the past, I think he'll get first bite of the cherry. And if not, I would not be surprised if Win Cup comes back for a year. But having said that, I would be pretty comfortable saying it's going to be Stanaway.
So you can't see a Chaz moving across? Would he do that, firstly?
I don't know. I don't know. I could see a driver moving, But at the same time, like a lot of the drive, like I think if SVG is gone, a lot of the drivers would probably feel pretty comfortable like the good drivers would feel pretty comfortable in the teams they're in. We know with cars that they've got a year in and engineers that they know going for the championship rather than moving to Triple Eight. It's going to be an interesting conundrum. What if anyone was to move? I think it would probably be Waters, but at the same time, he's such a Tickford boy. I don't know.
That's what I was going to say. Like Chaz has obviously driven Holden's before. Like he hasn't really got that affinity for the badge. I think Cam seems more to be a Ford guy from looking on the outside.
Chaz is still very much, I think, a Ford guy. I think he's pretty happy that they've gone back to the Mustangs. The thing as well that I will say is that I don't think this Mustang problem will be around next year.
Yeah,
like it's already gotten so much better. So,
I guess it's like in Formula One though. If someone offers you the top seat in a Red Bull, you're going to take it, right?
Yeah, I would just be interested to see who they bring in. I like there is it's going to be it's going to be interesting how quickly they can sort it out. That's for sure, because it's not. I think it's put Triple Eight in an interesting position where a lot of drivers are also locked up for next year because no one foresaw this happening. No one foresaw SVG leaving mid-season, and I would expect a lot of the other drivers, like if your Chaz's and your Cams aren't going to hit the open market. So if you're going to bring someone in, I don't think any of the real A graders are off contract. So, and I don't see a team just going, "Oh, you can walk to Triple Eight and until your contract's up," which is why I think bringing Win-Cup back would be very possible.
Other than parity, what are your main kind of takeaways of the first half of the season, and are there any like key points that you'd like to discuss?
But over the first half of the season, I've been really happy with how Erebus have been performing as a team, not just as drivers, but as a team in terms of the strategies they're calling, the consistency they're showing, the pit stop prowess that they've developed as well. They're not really making pit stop blunders. Their drivers are sitting first and second, and they're in the driving seat for the championship. Do they have the steam for it? I don't know. It looks like SVG is coming hard, but they've got there over the first half of the year, and it will be interesting when we get to the enduro season where Triple Eight do so well. If they can, if they can get through 3 big points events without making a cock up, and if they can do that, then I've just been really pleasantly surprised of how strong they've been, and for their drivers as well, because they've really grown those drivers. They didn't poach them from anyone. They're their drivers. So to be able to do it with their drivers that they've put faith in is been so awesome. Other than that, I think, touching on the parity for a second, I've been underwhelmed with the Ford side still. I don't know if they're sharing data, but I think I know they're not sharing data, because the head of Ford Performance was saying he can't see the data of all his Ford cars. I'm like, well, if he's not seeing it, then there can't be, group decisions being made. It must be for Supercars eyes only. So that's a bit befuddling if they're trying to, if you think that we're trying to pull all stops to get this shit sorted. Out of the main drivers, I think Chaz is performing as you would expect. Cam is performing how you'd expect. The rookie, the battle between the rookies, I think, has been really interesting. I think Matt Payne has shown glimpses with Grove Racing, why he's why he was such a touted talent when he came in. I think also Cam Hill with Matt Stone Racing over the last couple of events has really risen as well. And LeBrock has been stealing the headlines for them with a few podiums, race wins and good results. But I think Cam Hill has also been showing a lot of pace, and like yesterday, he was running really well, but he had I think that the car had a big, they had a big blunder in the pits as well, which screwed him. So between them two, I think it's going to be an interesting battle towards the end of the year. I would have liked to see Declan Fraser up there as well with them too, but he hasn't been as fortunate, or I think that tradie car might just be cursed. We saw the same problems with Kostecki. So if he can get up there, I would like to see all three of them having, their moments, where the other two have definitely had moments in the, moments of notice. And I think we're getting to the better part of the season now. Like, without a doubt, you're getting to the enduro part of the season, which is always a bit more, not interesting, but, we've got Bathurst still to come. We've got Sandown still to come. We've got the Gold Coast still to come. And we've still got Adelaide to come. Some of the better races. So hopefully
I'd love to go to the Gold Coast.
I think, yeah. Well, I think that's going to be. This is my only gripe with the Gold Coast, and it's always been my gripe. Make it one race. Make it one long 600 race on the streets. But I know why they do it as 2-300s. I think the fact that it's an endurance event, it should be a longer race. Like, that's just my 2 cents. But yeah, I think hopefully by the time we get to that part of the season, the parity issue will no longer be a talking point, because I will echo what Tristan said. If we get to Bathurst and it's a Camaro race and a Ford race, that's never happened in my lifetime, and it will look pretty bad on the sport for our biggest race being a farcical.
Yeah, and that race is Supercars' biggest marketing point, right? Because
100%.
If you don't watch, like, a lot of people won't watch any other event bar Bathurst. So yeah, I look forward to Bathurst every year. So hopefully it is sorted by then, because I would like to see. Last year, I just remember, obviously SVG won it, but the last stint where Cam and Chaz were just hammering hard at the end there, like that. So it was so good. But yeah, fingers crossed.
From what we saw this week, and hopefully it gets validated by the time we get to it's a continuing trend by the time we get there. The Mustang race pace, I think, is just as good as the Camaro pace. Qualifying, I think, is an issue, but also the fact that they keep changing the Mustang doesn't help the Mustang teams hone in on a qualifying setup, because their parameters keep changing. And I think that also is going to remain a problem until they can nail something down, because how you set up the car, if you're changing stuff all the time is not helpful. So you can always hope, and I'm a pretty optimistic guy, and I don't think it's as bad as people say. And I think if the Ford teams start getting their shit together and the drivers start getting their shit together, we'll have a better sport as well. Because the Camaro drivers, not being biased, a lot of them are getting their shit together. And I think that is making the discrepancy a lot bigger.
Well, here's to a end of year where Chaz, at least Cam and Chaz, are battling with the Camaros consistently in quali and in race pace.
Well, you would think, this is probably the last point I'll make before we close it. You would think, from what it sounds like, that Chaz is so far out of the title race, it's not funny. But he's still within 300 points of the championship, which is one catastrophe at Sandown, one catastrophe at Bathurst, and one non-finish at any of the 250 races that are there to come. There is so much left in this championship, and it's probably kudos to him more than anything. But even he's had a few races of, it's not like Triple Eight have had it all their own way this year as well. So, it's not as bad as I think. People have to probably not listen to the, doomsdayers what is it? The doomsayers a little bit less, and stop jumping on the bandwagon and look at it for themselves. And I think if you take you look at every race independently and take everything with a grain of salt, don't get too high, don't get too low, you'll realize, yes, there are problems, but I don't think it's anywhere near what it's being blown out to be.
I think I said it a few weeks ago. It's the first year of new regulations. There's always going to be issues. Like, they're never ironed out perfectly in the first year. So it is what it is.
Yeah. And I think if Triple Eight was a Ford team, I still would expect them to be where they are right now. And that's the honest truth. If
parity wouldn't even be.
No. It wouldn't even be an issue if there was if Triple Eight or Erebus was a Ford team.
Well, food for thought.
It definitely is. It definitely is.